The police file said closed, stamped in red ink like a final heartbeat. But what if that stamp was a lie? Because some nights the past has a way of knocking, and when it does, it never asks politely. This is a true crime story, a dark case file that everyone believed was finished, sealed, and buried, until a single forgotten detail surfaced decades later and cracked the silence wide open. On a cold October evening in 1998 in the fading industrial town of Briar Hollow, Pennsylvania, 27-year-old Emily Carter vanished after leaving her night shift at a local diner, a place that smelled of burnt coffee and grease and desperation. Emily was a familiar face, soft-spoken, punctual, the kind of person who always wiped the counter twice, and left a smile behind even for customers who did not deserve it. She lived alone in a narrow brick apartment 2 blocks from the diner, and she never missed a shift, never stayed out late, never disappeared without telling someone where she was going. When she did not come home that night, her mother knew something was wrong before the sun came up. Briar Hollow was the type of town where secrets were passed down like heirlooms, where everyone knew everyone else's business, or at least pretended to. The police initially treated Emily's disappearance as a likely runaway situation, despite her stable job, close family ties, and lack of any reason to vanish. It took 36 hours before a formal search began, and by then whatever trail Emily left behind was already cold. Her car was found parked behind the diner, keys still in the ignition, driver's door slightly ajar, as if she had stepped out for just a moment and planned to come back. Inside the vehicle, her purse sat untouched, wallet still inside, cash still neatly folded. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken glass, no blood, just silence. In true crime stories, silence can be the loudest clue of all. Witnesses reported seeing a dark sedan idling near the alley behind the diner shortly after Emily's shift ended. No one could agree on the make or model. Some said it was black, others swore it was dark blue. One witness claimed they saw Emily talking to a man near the car, but could not describe his face, only that he was taller than her and wore a dark jacket. That vague description would haunt the case for years. Police interviewed coworkers, regular customers, and anyone with even a distant connection to Emily. One name quickly rose to the surface: Mark Densley, Emily's ex-boyfriend. Mark had a temper, a record for bar fights, and a reputation around town that made him an easy target. He admitted they had argued weeks before her disappearance over money and control, but insisted he had not seen her that night. There was no physical evidence tying him to the scene, but circumstantial clues piled up like shadows. His car was a dark sedan. He could not provide a solid alibi for the time frame. In a town desperate for answers, suspicion is often enough to become truth. Days turned into weeks, and then into months. Search parties combed the nearby woods, dragged the river, and followed every tip, no matter how thin. Then, 3 months later, a hunter discovered human remains in a shallow grave 20 miles outside town. Dental records confirmed the worst. Emily Carter was dead. The autopsy revealed she had died from blunt force trauma to the head, delivered with enough force to suggest rage rather than accident. There was evidence of restraint, bruises on her wrists, but no conclusive forensic evidence that could definitively identify a suspect. The murder weapon was never found. The location where her body was discovered raised more questions than answers. It was off a rarely used service road, known mostly to locals, close enough to be convenient, far enough to be hidden. Investigators focused heavily on Mark. Under pressure, exhausted and surrounded by a narrative that painted him as the monster, he eventually confessed during a marathon interrogation that lasted nearly 12 hours. The confession was messy, inconsistent, and riddled with details that did not align with the evidence, but in 1999, it was enough. Mark Densley was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. The town exhaled. The case was closed. Emily's family buried her and tried to rebuild their lives on top of unanswered questions. For 20 years, the file collected dust in an evidence room, its red close stamp fading with time. Then, in 2020, something changed. A newly appointed cold case detective named Lavra Mitchell began reviewing old files as part of a routine audit. Lavra had a reputation for obsession, for noticing what others overlooked. When she reached Emily Carter's case, she felt an unease she could not explain. The confession bothered her. It read less like a memory and more like a story fed to someone who just wanted the questions to stop. Lavra noticed that several pieces of evidence mentioned in interrogation transcripts were never logged into evidence. Most alarming of all, a single fingerprint lifted from Emily's car door had never been run through modern databases. At the time, the technology simply had not been there. Now it was. With quiet determination, Lavra reopened the case, starting with that fingerprint. When the results came back, her hands shook. The print did not belong to Mark Densley. It belonged to a man named Thomas Reed, a name that had appeared only once in the original file, buried in the margins of a witness statement. Thomas Reed was a former delivery driver who had frequented the diner and had moved out of state shortly after Emily's disappearance. Back in 1998, he was questioned briefly and cleared due to lack of evidence. No one looked twice. Lavra did. She dug into Thomas's background and found a pattern that chilled her blood. 2 unsolved assaults in neighboring states, both involving young women taken from public places late at night, both cases closed due to insufficient evidence. DNA from those scenes had recently been uploaded to a national database. Lavra requested a comparison. The match was undeniable. The DNA found under Emily Carter's fingernails belonged to Thomas Reed. The evidence had always been there, waiting for someone to listen. Lavra moved quickly, aware that time was once again the enemy. Thomas Reed was located living under a different name in a rural town nearly 1,000 miles away. When police arrived at his doorstep, they found a man who looked older, heavier, but carried the same cold eyes described by witnesses decades earlier. Confronted with the evidence, Thomas initially denied everything. But unlike Mark, he cracked quickly. He confessed to meeting Emily that night, to offering her a ride, to losing control when she rejected him. He described details only the killer could know. The case erupted back into public view like a reopened wound. News headlines screamed about the wrongful conviction, about the failure of the justice system, about a man who had lost 20 years of his life behind bars for a crime he did not commit. Mark Densley was exonerated and released, stepping out of prison into a world that had moved on without him. Emily's family faced a storm of emotions, relief tangled with rage, justice arriving decades too late to feel complete. Thomas Reed was tried and convicted, sentenced to multiple life terms. The red close stamp was reapplied, but this time, it felt heavier, more fragile. Even now, questions remain. How many warnings were missed? How much suffering could have been prevented? How many other dark case files sit quietly, marked closed, waiting for someone to look again? In the world of true crime, closure is rarely permanent, and the past is never truly silent. This case reminds us that justice is not just about endings, but about the courage to reopen what everyone else is afraid to touch. This has been a Dark Case Files true crime story, that proves the truth has a pulse, no matter how long it is buried. And as the screen fades to black, we leave you with one question. How many closed cases are still hiding the wrong truth? If this story kept you watching, subscribe to Dark Case Files for more true crime stories that refuse to stay buried.